My son shamed me before everyone. Then my granddaughter said something he didn't expect. The gathering was meant to be simple. That was how it was described when the invitation came. Nothing fancy. Just family, a few friends, food on the table, and polite conversation. The parent arrived with that understanding and nothing more. There was no sense of worry while getting ready that day. Clothes were chosen carefully, but not with stress. The parent wanted to look neat, respectful, and calm. This was family, after all. A place that was supposed to feel safe. Hit that subscribe button and tap the bell icon so you never miss our latest uploads. The house was already full when the parent arrived. Cars lined the street. Voices drifted out through open windows. Laughter rose and fell, mixed with music playing softly in the background. From the outside, it looked warm and welcoming. The kind of gathering people talked about later with smiles. The parent paused for a moment before going in, smoothing their clothes, taking a steady breath, and reminding themselves to enjoy the day. Inside, familiar faces turned and offered greetings. Some smiles were genuine. Others were polite, practiced, and brief. The parent noticed this but did not dwell on it. Family gatherings were often like that. People carried their own thoughts, their own quiet frustrations. It was normal. Or at least, it had become normal over the years. The parent moved through the room slowly, greeting relatives, asking about health, work, and daily life. Conversations stayed light. Weather, food, small updates. Nothing heavy. Nothing personal. On the surface, everything seemed fine. But beneath the calm tone, there was something else. A feeling that could not be named easily. Like standing in a room where the air felt slightly thinner than usual. The son was there, surrounded by others. He was speaking loudly, confidently, telling a story that made people laugh. He looked comfortable, at ease, as if the room belonged to him. The parent watched from a distance for a moment, noticing how naturally others leaned in when he spoke. How his words filled the space. The parent felt a familiar mix of pride and distance. Pride in seeing the son confident and respected. Distance because that confidence rarely included them. When their eyes met briefly, the son nodded. Not unkindly. Not warmly either. Just a quick acknowledgement before he returned to his conversation. The parent told themselves not to read into it. People got busy at gatherings. Attention was divided. It did not mean anything. Food was served, and people began to settle into groups. Plates were filled. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. The smell of cooking filled the air, bringing comfort and memories of older gatherings, ones that felt simpler. The parents sat where there was space, not wanting to impose or disrupt. They listened more than they spoke, offering a comment here and there, smiling when appropriate. As time passed, the parent became more aware of the imbalance that had existed for years. It was not loud. It was not obvious. It lived in small moments. The way decisions were made without them. The way stories were told where their role was reduced or skipped. The way their presence was accepted but not fully included. Someone mentioned a past event, something the parent remembered clearly. Before they could add their part, the son spoke over them, correcting a detail that did not need correcting. The tone was casual, almost joking, but it cut quietly. The parent stopped speaking mid-sentence and smiled, letting it go. No one noticed. Or if they did, they chose not to. This was not new. Over the years, the parent had learned when to speak and when silence kept things smoother. Silence avoided conflict. Silence kept peace. Silence had become a habit, worn like a familiar coat. It was easier than explaining feelings that were often brushed aside. Laughter erupted again across the room. A joke was made at the parent's expense. Not cruel on the surface. Just light teasing, the kind people dismissed as harmless. The room reacted with soft laughter. The parent laughed too, though it reached their mouth before it reached their heart. The son smiled, satisfied, as if nothing out of place had occurred. The parent reminded themselves that gatherings were not the place for sensitivity. People joked. People spoke without thinking. It did not mean disrespect. Or so they told themselves. They watched the son move easily between guests, confident and relaxed. He spoke of achievements, plans, and future ideas. People listened. They nodded. They praised. The parent listened quietly, recognizing stories they had once supported from behind the scenes. Late nights. Sacrifices. Encouragement given without credit. None of it was mentioned now. And again, the parent said nothing. A relative sat beside the parent and spoke softly about how quickly time passed. About how children grew and became their own people. The parent agreed, smiling gently. Inside, they felt the weight of those words. Children did grow. And sometimes, in that growth, they forgot the ground that held them steady in the beginning. The music changed. Someone adjusted the volume. A toast was mentioned for later. The mood remained light, but the parent felt a growing sense of unease. Not fear. Not anger. Just awareness. Like noticing cracks in a wall you had leaned against for years. The son approached briefly, asking if the parent was enjoying themselves. The question sounded polite, rehearsed. The parent answered honestly but simply. Yes. Everything was fine. The son nodded and moved on, satisfied with the response. There was no deeper conversation. No pause to really listen. The exchange ended as quickly as it began. The parent watched him walk away and felt a familiar tightness in the chest. Not sadness exactly. More like acceptance mixed with disappointment. They had hoped quietly that today might feel different. That there might be a moment of genuine connection. But hope had learned to stay small over the years. As plates were cleared and conversations shifted, the parent reflected on how relationships changed slowly, almost invisibly. There was no single moment where things broke. Just small choices repeated over time. Words said carelessly. Appreciation left unspoken. Respect assumed rather than given. The parent noticed how others deferred to the son. How his opinions carried weight. How decisions about the gathering were directed through him, even though the parent was present. It was not intentional exclusion. It was worse. It was habit. They stood near a window for a moment, watching the light outside fade. The reflection in the glass showed a calm face, practiced and composed. Inside, thoughts moved quietly. The parent wondered when they had begun to accept so little without protest. When they had learned to shrink themselves to keep peace. A child ran past, laughing. Someone called after them gently. Life continued around the parent, full and loud. And yet, they felt oddly alone in the room. Present, but not central. Included, but not considered. The parent reminded themselves of their values. Family mattered. Patience mattered. Dignity mattered. They had always believed that respect would return naturally if they gave enough of it. That kindness would eventually be met with kindness. They held on to that belief now, even as it felt thinner than before. Someone announced that everyone should gather closer. There would be a moment soon. A few words. Nothing serious, they said. Just something to mark the occasion. The parent adjusted their posture, smoothing their clothes again, unaware of how significant that moment would become. As people gathered, the son stood comfortably at the center. The room quieted slowly. Smiles settled into expectant expressions. The parent stood among the others, heart steady, unaware that the balance they had lived with for so long was about to shift. At that moment, everything still appeared normal. Polite. Respectful. Safe. No raised voices. No visible conflict. Just a family gathered together, carrying unspoken histories beneath practiced smiles. The parent had no way of knowing that the calm of this gathering was only the surface, and that what came next would test years of silence, patience, and restraint. The room had gathered closer now, just as someone suggested. Chairs were adjusted. People shifted their weight from one foot to another. Conversations softened into murmurs. The air felt expectant, but still calm. Nothing about the moment seemed dangerous. It felt like another small pause in the evening, one that would pass quickly and be forgotten. The parent stood quietly among the others, hands loosely folded, posture steady. They had learned over time how to appear relaxed even when something inside felt unsettled. Years of family moments had taught them that calm was often the safest place to stand. The son cleared his throat lightly. It was not dramatic, not loud, just enough to draw attention. He smiled as he spoke, the kind of smile that suggested ease and confidence. The room responded instinctively. Faces turned toward him. Conversations stopped. He began with something light. A comment about how nice it was to have everyone together. About how rare it was these days for people to slow down and show up. Heads nodded. Someone chuckled. It felt harmless. Even warm. Then his tone shifted slightly. Not enough to be obvious. Just enough to change the weight of his words. He made a remark about responsibility. About how some people struggled to keep up with the pace of change. How times were different now, and not everyone adjusted well. He laughed softly at the end, as if it were a joke, as if the thought had simply slipped out. The parent felt it immediately. It was not the words alone. It was the direction of the glance that followed. Brief. Almost polite. But unmistakable. A few people noticed it too. Their eyes flicked from the son to the parent, then away again. No one said anything. The room shifted in a way that was hard to describe. Laughter faded too quickly. Smiles tightened. A quiet discomfort settled like dust. The parent felt exposed, as if a light had been turned on without warning. Not accused. Not confronted. Just placed gently, publicly, into a space where judgment lived. The kind of judgment that could be denied later if questioned. The kind that hid behind humor. Someone gave a small laugh, uncertain. Another person cleared their throat. The son continued, adding a few more words, carefully chosen. He spoke about independence. About not relying too much on the past. About learning when to step back and let others lead. Each sentence landed softly, but together they formed something heavier. The parent remained still. Their face did not change. They did not interrupt. They did not defend themselves. They did not ask for clarification. Inside, emotions rose quietly, then settled. Surprise came first. Then embarrassment. Then something calmer. They had felt this before. This was not the first time the son had spoken this way. It was simply the first time it happened so openly, with so many witnesses. Usually, these comments were made privately, or disguised more carefully. Today, the mask was thinner. The parent reminded themselves to breathe. They noticed small reactions around the room. A relative shifted uncomfortably. Someone looked down at their hands. Another person glanced toward the parent with sympathy, then quickly looked away, as if afraid to be seen noticing. No one stepped in. Silence stretched just long enough to feel awkward. Then the son smiled again and ended his comment with a light phrase, something meant to smooth the moment. The room responded automatically. A few people laughed. Someone clapped lightly, unsure why. The moment passed. Conversation slowly returned, though it did not feel the same. The energy had changed. The parent felt it clearly now. The gathering was no longer neutral ground. Someone nearby leaned toward the parent and said quietly, "You know how he is." The words were meant to comfort. They landed differently. The parent nodded politely. They had heard that sentence many times before. They moved a little to the side, giving themselves space. Their hands felt steady. Their voice, when they spoke next, sounded normal. They asked someone about their work, about their family. They smiled at the right moments. From the outside, nothing seemed wrong. Inside, The parent replayed the comment once, then stopped. They had learned not to let such moments grow larger than necessary. Still, something about today felt different. The public nature of it lingered. The son continued speaking with others, unaffected. His posture was relaxed. His mood unchanged. He did not look back at the parent again. The parent noticed how easy it was for people to accept the son's framing of things. How quickly they moved on. It was not because they agreed fully. It was because challenging him would require effort. And effort often felt uncomfortable in social settings. The parent thought about dignity. About how fragile it could feel in moments like this. How it could be chipped away without loud words or clear insults. Just tone. Timing. Audience. They remembered times in the past when they might have spoken up. When they might have corrected the narrative gently. Experience had taught them that doing so often led nowhere. Explanations were dismissed. Feelings were minimized. Silence, though painful, usually kept things from escalating. So they stayed composed. As the evening continued, the parent felt smaller, though nothing had physically changed. Their presence felt lighter, less anchored. They were there, but no longer fully seen on their own terms. A few people approached them later with casual conversation, as if nothing unusual had happened. The parent responded kindly. They did not bring up the comment. They did not seek reassurance. They did not want pity. What stayed with them most was not the son's words, but the lack of response from others. The quiet agreement of silence. The way discomfort was allowed to exist without being addressed. The parent realized then how alone someone could feel even in a crowded room. At one point, they caught their reflection again, this time in a darkened screen. Their expression was calm, controlled, respectable. It had taken years to learn that kind of composure. It had come at a cost. The son laughed loudly nearby, telling another story. The sound felt distant. The parent felt strangely detached, as if observing rather than participating. They reminded themselves that reacting publicly would only give the moment more power. That dignity sometimes meant choosing restraint. That not every wound needed an immediate response. But something had shifted. The parent felt it clearly now. The imbalance that had existed quietly for years had been exposed, even if only briefly. Others had seen it, even if they chose not to acknowledge it. As the gathering slowly moved toward its end, the parent knew this moment would not fade easily. It would return later, in quiet reflection, in unanswered questions, in decisions yet to be made. For now, they remained composed. They smiled when spoken to. They thanked the host. They said their goodbyes politely. No one could point to a single moment and say something had gone wrong. But the parent knew. Something important had been revealed, not loudly, not dramatically, but clearly enough to change how they would see things from now on. The evening continued as if nothing important had happened. Plates were collected. Music played softly again. Conversations restarted in small circles. From the outside, the gathering returned to its earlier rhythm. Anyone walking in at that moment would see a normal family event, calm and orderly. The parent remained where they were for a while, then slowly moved to a quieter part of the room. Their steps were unhurried. Their face remained neutral. No tension showed in their shoulders. No sharpness appeared in their eyes. Years of self-control had taught them how to hold themselves steady even when emotions stirred beneath the surface. Some people glanced at the parent now and then. A few exchanged looks with each other. There was curiosity there. And confusion. A silent question hung in the air. Why hadn't the parent reacted? To some, the lack of response looked like acceptance. To others, it looked like uncertainty. A few quietly assumed it meant weakness. The parent sensed these unspoken judgments but did not acknowledge them. They had learned long ago that explaining silence rarely changed how others interpreted it. People often filled quiet spaces with their own assumptions. Inside, the parent's thoughts moved slowly and clearly. There was no rush. No explosion of feeling. Just reflection. They thought about the years that led to this moment. Years that were rarely discussed out loud. Years filled with early mornings and late nights. With choosing responsibility over comfort. With putting someone else's needs before their own again and again. They remembered times when the son had struggled. When confidence was fragile and direction unclear. When guidance was needed but not always welcomed. The parent had stayed present through those times. Offering support quietly. Providing stability without asking for recognition. There were moments of pride too. Moments when the son succeeded, and the parent celebrated from the background. They never needed credit. Watching growth had been enough. But somewhere along the way, support had begun to be seen as something expected rather than something given. Sacrifice became invisible when it was consistent. Restraint went unnoticed when it was habitual. The parent realized that tonight's comment did not exist on its own. It was part of a longer pattern. A gradual shift in how respect was given and received. They noticed how easily people accepted the son's words earlier. How no one questioned the tone or intention. Authority had been quietly reassigned over time, without discussion or agreement. The parent stood near a shelf filled with old photographs. They recognized themselves in a few of them, younger, standing slightly behind others, smiling. Even then, they had been comfortable in the background. That choice had once felt right. Now, it felt heavier. A relative approached briefly and spoke about something unrelated. The parent listened attentively, responded politely, and kept the exchange short. The relative smiled and walked away, seemingly reassured that everything was fine. This was how misunderstandings grew. Calm faces created the illusion of calm hearts. The parent did not feel angry. They felt clear. They understood now that silence had been doing more than keeping peace. It had been teaching others how to treat them. Each unchallenged moment had quietly reinforced the imbalance. Across the room, the son continued engaging easily. His voice carried confidence. He laughed freely. He looked comfortable in his role. The parent watched briefly, then looked away. They did not feel the urge to confront him. Not here. Not like this. A public response would only mirror the same behavior they had just endured. The parent valued dignity too much for that. Still, dignity did not mean blindness. The parent acknowledged a truth they had avoided for a long time. Respect was no longer mutual. It had tilted slowly, almost invisibly, until one side carried more weight. They thought about all the times they had softened their words to avoid conflict. All the moments they had stepped back so the son could step forward. Those choices had been made out of care. But care, when taken for granted, could be mistaken for weakness. The parent felt no regret for the sacrifices they had made. They believed those choices had been right at the time. What troubled them was the realization that restraint was no longer being understood. Silence had once been strength. Tonight, it had been misread. The parent straightened slightly, not to draw attention, but to remind themselves of who they were. They were not small. They had simply chosen not to take up space. A quiet resolve began to form. Not anger. Not bitterness. Just awareness. The gathering slowly moved toward its end. Guests began preparing to leave. Goodbyes were exchanged. The son spoke confidently near the door, thanking people for coming. He did not seek out the parent. The parent waited until there was a natural moment to leave. They offered polite farewells, accepted a few brief hugs, and stepped outside into the cooler air. The night felt calmer, clearer. As they walked away, the parent reflected on how much strength it took to remain composed. How endurance was often mistaken for absence. How dignity sometimes required re-evaluation, not reaction. They understood now that something would need to change. Not loudly. Not dramatically. But intentionally. For years, silence had been their way of loving, protecting, and preserving peace. Tonight, silence had revealed its limit. The room did not return fully to normal after that. Conversations resumed, but they carried a different tone now. Lighter on the surface, heavier underneath. People spoke, but listened more closely. Laughter came a little later than usual, and faded a little sooner. The shift was subtle. No one pointed it out. No one named it. But it was there, moving quietly through the space. The son stood near the center again, speaking with ease. His voice carried confidence, even warmth. He spoke as if nothing unusual had happened, as if the earlier moment had simply blended into the evening without consequence. He took charge of small things, directing where chairs should go, suggesting when dessert should be served, reminding someone about music volume. Each action seemed harmless on its own. Together, they painted a picture of control. People responded to him instinctively. They nodded. They followed suggestions. They laughed at the right moments. Authority sat on him comfortably, like a familiar jacket. The parent noticed all of this quietly. They remained present but uncentered, standing slightly to the side, hands relaxed, expression calm. They did not attempt to insert themselves back into the flow. They did not seek validation or correction. Their stillness contrasted sharply with the son's movement. A few people began to notice the contrast. Not openly. Not with words. But through small changes in attention. Someone glanced from the son to the parent and paused. Another person hesitated before laughing too loudly. A quiet awareness spread, slow and uncertain. The son spoke again, telling a story meant to be entertaining. It landed well enough. People smiled. But the energy did not lift the way it had earlier. Something held it down. The parent felt it too. The weight in the room was not aimed at them, but it brushed past them gently, like a reminder. They did not feel embarrassed anymore. They felt observant. They noticed how the son spoke over others now, not aggressively, just confidently. How interruptions were accepted without comment. How decisions were made quickly, without checking in with anyone else. The same behavior that once felt normal now stood out. The parent realized that contrast could speak louder than argument. They did nothing to heighten it. They simply remained as they were, quiet, composed, attentive. Their presence was steady, unchanging. It created a space where the son's confidence began to look less like leadership and more like assumption. A relative nearby shifted uncomfortably during one of the son's comments. Another person exchanged a brief look with someone else. These were small reactions, but they mattered. The room was listening now. The son did not seem to notice. Or if he did, he dismissed it. His posture stayed relaxed. His tone stayed light. He assumed the moment belonged to him. The parent remembered earlier years, when confidence had been fragile, when leadership had been learned slowly, with guidance and patience. They had once stood beside the son, quietly supporting each step. Now that support had become invisible. The parent did not feel the need to reclaim it. What they felt instead was clarity. This was not about being heard anymore. It was about being understood. The atmosphere thickened as the evening wore on. Not with hostility, but with awareness. People became more careful with their words. Conversations softened. The room felt smaller. At one point, the son laughed loudly again. The sound echoed briefly, then settled. The response was delayed, polite, controlled. The parent noticed how silence followed him now, not because people were afraid to speak, but because they were thinking. The contrast had done its work. The parent's calm presence had become a mirror. Without saying a word, it reflected something back into the room. Something that could not be unseen once noticed. They stood, patient and steady, not to prove a point, but because this was who they were. They had spent years cultivating restraint. Tonight, restraint had weight. The son continued moving through the room, unaware that the energy had shifted away from him slightly. Control, once assumed, now felt observed. The gathering moved closer to its end. People checked the time. Someone mentioned the late hour. Chairs were pushed back slowly. The parent remained quiet until the very end. Their presence never wavered. They did not leave early. They did not make a statement. They simply stayed. And in staying, they allowed the room to change around them. No words were exchanged. No confrontation occurred. But something had shifted. The room felt it. And even if no one spoke of it later, the balance would not return to what it had been before. The room was preparing to settle into its final moments when it happened. People were already thinking about leaving. Coats had been gathered. Phones checked. Conversations had grown quieter, more practical. The granddaughter had been there the entire time. She had not been loud. She had not tried to draw attention. She stood slightly behind others for most of the evening, listening more than speaking, watching carefully. To many in the room, she seemed like just another quiet presence. Easy to overlook. But she had noticed everything. She had noticed the tone of the son's words earlier. The way humor had been used to soften judgment. The brief glance that followed. The silence that came after. She had noticed the parents' stillness. The way they didn't rush to explain or defend. The way their calm did not change even when the room shifted. She had noticed the tension that settled quietly after. The kind that lingered without anyone naming it. Now, as the gathering reached its end, she stepped forward. It was not dramatic. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt. She waited for a pause, a natural break in conversation, then spoke. Her voice was steady, clear, calm. "I just want to say something," she began. The room turned toward her, surprised more by who was speaking than by the words themselves. This was not someone who usually addressed the group. A few people smiled politely, expecting something light. She took a small breath, not from nerves, but from care. "I've been listening tonight," she said. "And I think it's important to say this out loud." The room grew quiet. She didn't look at the son at first. Her eyes moved briefly around the room, then rested on the parent. Not dramatically. Not pleading. Just acknowledging their presence. "Respect isn't always loud," she continued. "Sometimes it's shown by how we speak about people when they're right there. And sometimes by how we don't." A few people shifted. She didn't accuse anyone. She didn't raise her voice. She spoke as if stating something obvious, something that should have been clear already. "I've watched how things work in this family," she said gently. "And I think we've gotten used to taking some people's patience for granted." The words landed softly, but they landed. The parent felt it before they fully understood it. A quiet tightening in the chest. Not from hurt this time, but from recognition. The granddaughter continued. "There are people here who have supported others for years without asking for attention. Without needing credit. And somehow, that's been mistaken for not needing respect." No one spoke. She turned now calmly toward the son. Her expression did not change. There was no challenge in her eyes. Only honesty. "Confidence is important," she said. "But so is remembering who helped build the ground you're standing on." The son froze. Not visibly at first. His posture stayed upright. His face neutral. But something in his eyes shifted. A flicker of surprise. Then stillness. The room held its breath. The granddaughter did not press further. She did not list examples. She did not revisit the earlier comment directly. She didn't need to. "I think we all know what I mean," she said quietly. Silence followed. A different kind of silence than before. This one felt clean. Clear. Someone cleared their throat, then stopped. Another person nodded slowly, as if something had finally clicked into place. The parent stood very still. They did not look away. They did not look down. For the first time that evening, they felt fully seen without having to explain themselves. The granddaughter stepped back slightly, returning to her place among the others. She had said what she came to say. No more. No less. No one rushed to speak. The son opened his mouth, then closed it again. He looked around the room, as if expecting support, agreement, something to balance the moment. None came. Not because people were against him, but because the truth had been spoken simply, and there was nothing to argue with. The room felt different now. Lighter somehow, despite the seriousness. As if something unspoken had finally been allowed into the open. The parent felt a quiet release inside. Not triumph. Not satisfaction. Relief. They had not asked for this moment. They had not planned it. And yet, it felt right. The son shifted his weight slightly. His confidence did not disappear, but it no longer filled the room the same way. It had been interrupted, gently but firmly. People began to move again. Slowly. Conversations restarted, but with a new tone. Softer. More careful. A few people approached the parent quietly, offering small gestures of connection. A hand on the arm. A brief smile. Nothing dramatic. The granddaughter met the parent's eyes once more. Just for a second. There was no need for words. The parent nodded back, their expression calm, their posture unchanged. They had stayed silent. And in that silence, someone else had finally spoken the truth. The silence that followed did not rush to fill itself. It stayed. The son stood where he was, hands relaxed at his sides, posture still confident at first glance. But something inside him had paused. The ease he carried moments ago no longer flowed the same way. His expression remained neutral, yet his eyes searched the room as if looking for a familiar response that did not arrive. He did not speak. That alone was unusual. Usually, he had an answer ready. A way to redirect, explain, or soften any moment that challenged him. He had learned that skill well. Tonight, it did not come. The granddaughter's words had not attacked him. They had not blamed or embarrassed him. They had simply named what everyone had felt but avoided saying. That made them difficult to dismiss. The son opened his mouth slightly, then closed it again. The movement was small, almost unnoticed, but it mattered. It was the first sign that control had slipped. The room watched without staring. No one pushed him to respond. No one filled the space for him. The quiet was not hostile. It was waiting. For the first time that evening, the son did not guide the moment. He looked toward the parent briefly. The glance was quick, unreadable. There was no anger in it. No accusation. Just uncertainty. The parent met the look calmly. They did not nod. They did not smile. They did not look away either. Their face held the same steady expression it had carried all night. Composed. Grounded. Present. That steadiness seemed to hold the room in place. The son shifted his weight slightly. His confidence did not vanish, but it no longer filled the space around him. It had pulled inward, as if reconsidering its shape. Someone near the back cleared their throat, then stopped themselves. Another person folded their arms, thoughtful rather than defensive. No one rushed to change the subject. The power in the room had moved, quietly. Not from words raised in anger. Not from confrontation. But from truth spoken without malice, and met with silence instead of resistance. The son's role felt suddenly different. Not diminished, but exposed. For the first time, his authority was being observed instead of assumed. He gave a small nod, more to himself than to anyone else. It was not an agreement. It was not an apology. It was a pause. That pause said more than any argument could have. The parent felt it clearly now. The shift was real. It did not come with satisfaction or victory. It came with calm. They did not feel the urge to speak. This was not their moment to claim. The truth had already done its work. The son finally spoke, but only a few words. Something neutral. Something safe. A simple suggestion about wrapping things up for the night. No explanation. No defense. People nodded, accepting the transition. The gathering began to move again, slowly, carefully. Chairs scraped softly. Bags were picked up. Coats were adjusted. But the room was not the same. The son stepped aside to let others pass. His movements were polite, measured. He avoided the center now, choosing the edge instead. The parent noticed, without reacting. The granddaughter stood quietly, her part complete. She did not look for acknowledgement. She did not look away either. As people prepared to leave, the quiet remained. Not uncomfortable, just thoughtful. The parent understood then that something important had changed. The son had not been defeated. He had been interrupted. And in that interruption, the balance had begun to shift. The gathering did not end right away. People stayed a little longer, speaking more quietly now, as if the room itself had learned to listen. Nothing had been said openly after the pause, yet everything felt different. The shift could not be undone. It lingered in the way people moved, in the care they took with their words. The parent stood among them, still calm, still composed. But inside, something had settled. Not pride. Not relief exactly. More like alignment. For the first time that evening, they did not feel invisible. They had not been defended loudly. No one had praised them or apologized. And yet, they felt seen. That feeling was enough. A few relatives approached slowly, not all at once. Each interaction was small and quiet. A brief comment about the evening. A gentle question about health. A hand resting lightly on an arm for a moment longer than necessary. None of them mentioned what had happened. They didn't need to. The parent responded with the same kindness they always had. They did not correct anyone. They did not share their feelings. They simply received the change. Across the room, the granddaughter remained where she was. She did not stand taller. She did not shrink back. Her calm presence carried a new weight now. People looked at her differently. Not with admiration exactly, but with respect. The kind that grows quietly when someone speaks truth without seeking attention. Someone thanked her softly for saying what she did. She nodded, uncomfortable with praise, and changed the subject. She had not spoken for recognition. She had spoken because it was right. The parent noticed and felt a quiet warmth. Not pride that demanded expression. Just gratitude. The son moved through the room with less ease than before. He still spoke politely. Still smiled. But his attention had turned inward. He listened more. He paused before speaking. Several times, he seemed about to say something, then stopped. His usual confidence had not disappeared, but it had been interrupted by awareness. He noticed now how people reacted to his words. The brief silences. The thoughtful looks. The absence of automatic agreement. It unsettled him. Not because he had been challenged openly, but because he had been understood. For the first time, he was left alone with his own reflection. The gathering continued to wind down. Goodbyes came slowly. People lingered in doorways, exchanging final words that felt more sincere than before. The parent prepared to leave when it felt natural. No rush. No statement made by departure. As they stepped toward the door, the son glanced up. Their eyes met again. This time, the look held something new. Not defiance. Not dismissal. Recognition. It passed quickly, but it mattered. The parent nodded gently and continued on. No words were exchanged. None were needed. Outside, the air felt lighter, clearer. Inside the house, conversations slowly ended. People carried the evening with them, thinking about their own silence. About moments they had chosen comfort over fairness. The granddaughter gathered her things, quiet as always. But something followed her now, respect that did not need announcement. The son stood alone for a moment after most had left. He replayed the evening without excuses. He remembered the comment he had made. The ease with which it came. The way he had assumed it would pass unnoticed. It hadn't. The truth had been spoken without anger, and that made it impossible to ignore. The gathering had ended, but awareness had only begun. The house eventually fell quiet. Chairs were back in place. Dishes stacked neatly. Lights dimmed one by one. What remained was not the noise of the gathering, but the weight of what had been learned. The parent walked away from the evening without replaying it over and over. There was no need to. The truth had already settled. They reflected quietly, not on what had been said, but on what had not needed to be said. For years, they had believed dignity required explanation. That respect had to be earned repeatedly, proven through patience and restraint. That silence meant endurance. Now they understood something different. Dignity did not require defense. It did not demand justification or loud correction. It existed on its own, steady and intact, even when misunderstood. Tonight had shown them that composure was not weakness. It was clarity. They realized that staying calm had not diminished them. It had revealed others. The parent felt no anger toward the son. Only a quiet acceptance that relationships change when truth is allowed space. They had protected peace for a long time. Now, they would protect self-respect with the same care. The granddaughter carried the evening with her differently. She did not feel proud in the way people expect pride. She felt grounded. She had spoken because silence had begun to feel wrong. She had learned that respect did not need force to be heard. Her words had not been loud, but they had carried weight. She understood now that honesty, when offered without anger, could change the direction of a room. That fairness spoken gently could interrupt years of imbalance. She would remember that. The son sat alone later, thinking back on the moment he had frozen. The pause that had caught him off guard stayed with him. He understood then that public shame did not always arrive as raised voices or harsh words. Sometimes it arrived quietly, through truth spoken calmly, in front of witnesses. That kind of moment left marks. Not visible ones, but lasting ones. He realized that authority, once questioned internally, could not be rebuilt through confidence alone. It required reflection, responsibility, awareness. The silence that followed the truth had been louder than any argument he could have made. He could not ignore it. The gathering was over, but its lesson remained. Some truths do not demand defense. Some voices do not need volume. Sometimes the strongest voice in the room is the one that speaks with honesty, not volume.